Hello everyone. My greetings to one and all. This is the 7th session on utility analysis. So far, you have understood the concepts of total utility, marginal utility, in util terms, in money terms, relationship between total and marginal utility, and law of diminishing marginal utility. Keeping these concepts in mind, now it's the time to understand the basis of decision making by the consumer. I am Poonam Vohra from Microeconomics Learning Center. In this session, you will understand how does a consumer decide how much of a good to buy of a particular commodity in order to get maximum satisfaction. Mind it, here assumption made is that the consumer is going to buy just one commodity. Technically, it is called consumer's equilibrium. Equilibrium is a state of balance or stability. And from this state of balance, the consumer has no incentive to deviate, as this is the optimum point, given the constraints faced by the consumer. So, let's begin. Let's understand the broad framework of consumers' behavior through utility analysis. The consumer would always aim to achieve the level of maximum satisfaction, whether he consumes just one commodity or more than one commodity. In either of the cases, the consumer would always compare benefit received by its consumption and the cost that has to be paid. The consumer would get maximum satisfaction when the rupee worth of satisfaction that the consumer expects to get is exactly same as the rupee worth of satisfaction that the consumer actually gets. That is to say that the ratio of marginal utility to price of X is same as marginal utility of money if the consumer consumes one commodity, and the ratio of marginal utility and price of X to ratio of marginal utility and price of Y is same as marginal utility of money if the consumer consumes more than one commodity. Let's understand these aspects. When the consumer consumes one commodity, the consumer would try to equate. Any rational consumer would try to maximize his satisfaction level subject to his budget constraint. The number of units the consumer consumes depends on two factors. One, expected utility for each successive unit, that is, marginal utility of X, and price of commodity X, that is Px. So the consumer compares the price or cost involved of the given commodity with its utility or satisfaction by consuming it. So being a rational consumer, he will be at equilibrium when marginal utility of X is same as price of commodity X. The goal of every consumer is to attain equilibrium between the benefit that he gets by consuming the commodity with the cost that he has to pay for it. But this situation may not be there always. There could be disequilibrium, that is a possibility when benefit that the consumer receives is more than the cost that he has to pay. In such a situation, the consumer will consume more of a commodity. As he consumes more, utility that he gets will decline. Alternatively, the cost that he has to pay for the commodity is less. So the consumer buys more. And as he buys more, marginal utility falls. Or in economic terms, marginal utility is greater than the price of commodity X. It implies that the rupee worth of satisfaction that the consumer expects to get is much more than the rupee worth of satisfaction that the consumer actually gets. So, in order to attain equilibrium, the consumer is required to reduce consumption. In continuation, there could be a possibility that benefit that he receives is less than the cost that he has to pay. In such a situation, the consumer will consume less of a commodity. As he consumes less, utility that he gets will increase. Alternatively, benefit is less. So, the consumer buys less. As he buys less, marginal utility increases, or in economic terms, marginal utility of X is less than the price of commodity X. It implies that rupee worth of satisfaction that the consumer expects to get is much less than the rupee worth of satisfaction that the consumer actually gets. In order to attain equilibrium, the consumer is required to increase consumption. It has been understood that there is a possibility of disequilibrium. That is, if benefit or marginal utility is greater than the cost or price, the consumer consumes more. Utility declines and consumption has to be reduced to attain equilibrium. But if benefit that the consumer gets or marginal utility is less as compared to the price he has to pay, then utility increases, consumption has to be increased in order to attain equilibrium. It implies that to attain equilibrium, adjustments need to be made. Also, following conditions need to be met. 1. That marginal utility of X should be equal to price of X if it is assumed that 1 util is equal to 1 rupee. That is, rupee worth of marginal utility actually received is exactly equal to the rupee worth of satisfaction as desired by the consumer. But if it is assumed that 1 util is not equal to 1 rupee, then marginal utility of money needs to be calculated and it has to equate marginal utility in util terms. Second condition is that marginal utility must diminish as more and more units of a commodity are consumed. When these two conditions are satisfied, then benefit received from consuming a good is same as the cost incurred to consume a good. At this point, rupee worth of satisfaction that the consumer expects to get is exactly same as the rupee worth of satisfaction that the consumer actually gets. I hope you have understood the basis of decision making by the consumer in order to consume a certain number of units of a commodity. Same is justified with the help of a tabular presentation as well as its diagrammatic explanation. This will be discussed in the next session. Till then, keep reading and keep learning.